I'd like to introduce our next guest, who is wildlife expert Ivan Carter, one of the very best narrators around the subject of conservation in the Zambesia region. He is the founder of the Ivan Carter Wildlife Conservation Alliance and has achieved great success over the years. Ivan has received many incredible accolades. He is one of only 4 people to hold a professional guide, hunter, and canoe guide's license in Zimbabwe. And for those of you who don't know, the Zimbabwean guide's license is widely regarded as the toughest guiding qualification in Africa. Ivan is rated by Condé Nast Traveler as one of Africa's top 10 guides. He has been named by BBC Wildlife magazine as being a top Africa expert, and he is also an extremely brave man. You only need to look at his YouTube videos to see this. Ivan frequently herds wild elephants and giraffes and collars lions, leopards, and cheetahs as part of his conservation work. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Luke. That's some big steps to follow in there. So I really appreciate everybody joining. And, you know, it's really nice to see so many people joining a call like this. Because every single one of us is here for one reason, and that is the fact that we care about what's going on with our wildlife. I'm hearing a horrible echo. Is everybody getting a horrible echo?
It should be okay now, Ivan.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Greg. So yeah, it's great to have you all on. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time. It's really heartening to see a presentation from Gregory. Are you guys hearing that?
Yes, can I just ask everyone to be on mute, please? Thank you.
It's really heartening to hear Lord Hague's address and to realize that truly global entities are starting to work together. And I think that, you know, one of the things that we all realize is that those of us who've chosen to be on the front line of conservation, very often we don't think outside the box. And it really takes a presentation like this to make us think outside the box. I'm going to try and do a screen share now and see if my presentation will play. Let's just see here. Hold on 1 second. Can everybody see this here? Is that playing? How can you all see that first slide?
Yes, you can indeed.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, I thought that I would start with just going through modern day conservation versus what we all traditionally think of as conservation. What I did is I started with this slide, and one of the reasons I started with this slide is truly because there's an elephant in the room, so to speak. There's a let me see, I don't know if this is going to work. The elephant in the room is the question, what is conservation? We've all got to sit and ask ourselves that question, because that truly is the elephant in the room. That's truly a question that everybody is looking past in their quest to try and do something, to try and pursue something, to try and make a difference. And I think let's start with some reality. Let's start with some uncomfortable truths that I think should be the foundation of our understanding of this big word conservation. You know, as we look at the Zambesia Conservation Alliance, you're looking at these giant landscapes all held together with one of the most amazing river systems in the whole of Africa. And just the fact that, you know, the Brown brothers and many of us have spent so many wonderful hours in those ecosystems, they truly are worthy of our greatest conservation efforts. But let's look at some of the uncomfortable truths that have got to come first. In a world of almost 8 billion people, we are humans. I don't care how much you think you have less impact than the next person, we are humans. And there's 8 billion we consume 8 billion meals a day. We utilize every scrap of land we possibly can to cultivate what we consume. And we modify giant landscapes to make the houses that we live in. Every single one of us on this call right now, look around you and you will see that what you are sitting in, what you are sitting on, what you fed yourself today was at one point a natural resource. 96% of all mammals on Earth are humans and our livestock. And everything else, everything from a bat to an elephant, everything from a possum to a cheetah is just the remaining 4%. And so we are on this quest. We talk about clean energy. That's this narrative, clean energy. And you see a picture of a windmill. Well, let's look at the windmill. And what that tells you when you look at the reality is to generate 1 megawatt of wind turbine energy takes 220 tons of coal. We don't like coal, but we do like windmills. But without the coal industry, the windmill cannot exist. It's an uncomfortable truth, but it's a truth nonetheless. So while wind power currently accounts for approximately 24% of the world's global renewable installed capacity, 140 tons of steel are required in the average wind turbine. And to generate 140 tons of steel, you need very much more coal than steel. And so the reason I'm telling you these facts is that I think we must level the playing field a little bit. So you're a vegetarian. You're a vegetarian because you want to be kinder to wildlife. Our food is grown in a wildlife holocaust. This is where vegetarians' food, where all of our food actually is grown. How much wildlife is allowed to exist in here? Not a single wild organism is allowed to exist where humans grow their food. So what is the largest man-made thing on earth? Another uncomfortable truth. Some of you are probably thinking the Great Wall of China, some big building that you might know about, some major highway system. The largest man-made thing on earth, more than twice the size of Texas, is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. I was really, really fortunate earlier today, actually this morning, I've been on Cape Point in South Africa, and we've actually been diving with seals. And there's a seal colony here where you can go and you can snorkel with the seals, and you can get a really good look at the life of a seal and what a healthy marine ecosystem looks like. But all the way out there and all the way back, the conversation revolves around garbage. So now that we've established some reality and some uncomfortable truths, these are the things that conservationists don't want to talk about. Let's now get back to the first question I asked, which is the true meaning of conservation, which is something that both Luke and his brother Robin are hard pursuing. And I believe that when you talk about conservation, we are not talking about a lion. We may be talking about the traditional conservation where you're removing snares, you're arming an anti-poaching team to combat poaching, you're moving wire traps, or in this case, gin traps from an area in Mozambique. You might be talking about translocation of charismatic animals into an ecosystem that's been stabilized. You might be talking about working with a very effective organization to de-snare a giraffe or many giraffe, or even expand the wild giraffe's home range, as has been done by the Giraffe Conservation Foundation over the last few years by 6 million acres. Yes, that is traditional conservation. But the conservation that really matters is the conservation that includes community. It includes the traditional, it includes community, and it is informed by science. So when we really come back to it, true conservation has got to mean the conserving of the entire biodiversity of an area. If we are just looking at an elephant population or a lion population or a giraffe population, without looking at the insects and without looking at the microflora and without looking at everything that it takes to make that ecosystem tick, then our efforts to save the lion or the elephant or the chimpanzee or the giraffe in that ecosystem are going to be for nothing, because the ecosystem cannot sustain that animal without balance. And so conservation has to mean the conserving of an entire biodiversity. And that's where a group like the Zambesia Conservation Alliance truly gets it right, because they are about large landscapes and large landscape areas where we're stabilizing entire biodiversities in those landscapes. So modern day conservation, coming back to what I just mentioned, has got to include several very important components. It must first and foremost include the community. The community have got to be beneficiaries, and they've got to be partners in your conservation action. It's got to include science. You've got to have well-rounded science to inform your conservation management plans, because otherwise it's just going to be an opinion And as we all know, we've all got opinions, and not all opinions are correct. But if your opinions are based around hard facts that are generated by good science, then all of a sudden, you've got a worthy conservation action plan that's actually likely to be sustainable. And then, of course, the third and equally important component is the front line protection, what I call traditional conservation. It's the boots on the ground. It's the game rangers. It's the folks on the very front line who are doing the anti-poaching, who are educating the communities. That's the traditional conservation that has to be one of these components. And someone once said to me, conservation is like a three-legged stool. Without these three legs, that stool cannot stay upright. And so let's ask you, you need to ask yourself, how does the community benefit in each one of these components? Is the community a benefactor? Are they simply a nuisance where you kind of have the idea that the communities where all the poaching is harbored? Or are they partners? Because if they're not benefactors and if they're not partners, then your conservation action is going to be very short-lived, because the community, indeed, the strength of your relationship with the community is directly proportional to how effective your conservation can be. Do we understand the needs of our communities? Have any one of us actually gone to the community and sat with the chief and understood what their perspectives and needs are? So if you look at that, how could we possibly build a conservation action plan sitting around a boardroom table in the first world without a seat saved for the local chief and the local communities? Because if we don't understand how they perceive their wildlife, if we don't understand what they like or what they dislike or what their basic core needs are, how can we possibly build a sustainable conservation action plan that includes a community? You cannot sustainably solve a single African problem with a first world solution. You've got to, what I call, spend time sitting under the mango tree. And if you look around you, the truly effective conservation groups today are those that are spending time with traditional and tribal leaders, understanding what communities want. And if you can understand what your communities want and build their wants and their needs into your conservation action plan, your conservation action plan is going to succeed. Do the people understand the value of their wildlife? Do we, the conservationists, understand their perspective? Because if we don't understand their perspective, if we don't understand their value, if we don't understand how they look at their wildlife, how can we possibly build an action plan that includes our community that's going to succeed? It doesn't work that way. Just a great example of that is that in many of the Bantu root languages, the word for nyama is, the word nyama means animal, and it also means meat, which means that in many, many African cultures that are living on or even below the breadline, you're looking at that animal as food first. You're not looking at it as just simply a beautiful animal. And so do we as conservationists understand, when we look at a lion, we look at the king of beasts, depending on your perspective, depending on who you may be, depending on your past experiences, most of us can agree that's the king of beasts. If you're a Maasai, you're looking at a rite of passage. You kill that thing with a spear, and all of a sudden, you cross into manhood. You become a warrior. You look at it from the perspective of a cattle herder, and you see the demon incarnate. There's nothing good about a lion when all of your wealth is in cattle, and lions love to eat cattle. So every time a lion wanders out of a national park and catches and eats the easiest thing it can find, which is usually domestic livestock, he's encroaching on the very livelihood of a tribal person. Have we ever considered that perspective when we're trying to recover an area and reintroduce lions? Do the community want those lions? If you're a photographic safari outfitter, your lion is one of your keystone species. If you've got great lion sightings, you're going to have full beds. And if you've got full beds, you're going to have a full bank account. And if you're going to have a full bank account, you're going to be able to have a great conservation impact. And so really a lion is a great example of all these many different perspectives that people have when they look at that lion. And so I want to tell you a quick story. We were fortunate enough to be part of one of the greatest lion recovery programs that has ever been. We reintroduced 24 lions into an ecosystem where they'd been extinct for several decades. And a few weeks before the lions arrived, we had a meeting with the chiefs, and they said, we are very worried because our ancestors are lions, and we're worried that they're going to fight with these new lions that come to the area. So we very respectfully said, well, what do you think should happen? Well, they said, well, we should have a beer drink, and we should get all of the witch doctors, and we should talk to the ancestors and make sure that they're happy. So that all duly happened. The ancestors were happy, the chiefs were happy. And that simple action of asking them what they meant, honestly, was the crux. That was the difference between the success and failure of this giant multi-million-dollar project. Had we not asked that, and had we not had that party, and had we not taken into consideration the community, the community perspective, we wouldn't have got a photo like this. In this photo are hands of a vet, there's hands of a pilot, there's hands of a researcher, there's hands of community leaders, and there's hands of local scientists. All of those hands upholding the translocation of this lion, which was fast asleep in an aircraft when we took this photo. But nevertheless, I really like this photo because it shows that with modern day conservation, everybody needs to have a hand. So why is science so important? Why do I put such a great value on science? And that's because any one of you that's on this call that understands anything about business will understand that what you measure matters. It truly does. And so if you can take a giraffe and understand more about that giraffe through good hard science, how much more effective is the conservation action plan that you build around that species going to be? So whether it's taking a quail in Texas and putting a collar on it, whether it's putting a collar on an elephant, or indeed a collar on a giraffe, the more we learn about an animal, the better off we are going to be when we have to build an action plan about its conservation. And so whether it's aerial surveys, whether it's collaring, wherever that is in the world, science has to be the very of everything you do for conservation, because that's going to give you the facts. And where this bison walks, or if you don't understand where a particular lion is home raised, how can you action landscape to have a reintroduction of that species? And so what you measure matters, and everything you do needs to be informed by good, solid science. Traditional conservation, that plays an enormous role. Your boots on the ground, and those are truly the men on the front line. Very often, those are people that you're employing from local communities. They're seeing the trickle-down effect of their salaries into their families, but not only that, they are also your police force. They're your police force, they're your military in your area. So if you've got your community on sides, if you are basing all of your conservation decisions on good science, and you've got a good police force, your project is absolutely destined for success. And so it doesn't matter with traditional conservation, whether it is the most visible of elephant translocations, whether it is putting lions in an aircraft to relocate them to an area where they're going to thrive, all of that has to be after several years of very costly science and research to determine that that is actually the right move at the right time. And I'm throwing a few slides in here from all over the world because these are not new ideas. This is not just about Africa. This is about all over the world. This was in a black bear den in southeastern Oklahoma where we were collaring black bears, and I was embedded with some researchers just to see how similar our conservation action plans are between Africa and the first world. And one thing that's similar is they're all expensive. And how are they paid for? Largely, they are paid for with several different ways. If we back out to 60,000 foot, we only have 5 ways that we can utilize our land. I showed you some horrifying pictures in the very beginning of the presentation. One of them was a picture of human settlement, a city in downtown Texas. You know, we look at that and we say, well, everybody needs a house. Well, absolutely. But let's not pretend that that doesn't severely modify an ecosystem. Well, we all need to eat. So we've got to have a bunch of agriculture. So millions and millions of acres are utilized for agriculture. That's great. I completely get it. I understand it. I support it because I have to support it because I eat food. And any one of you that eats food has to support agriculture. Any one of you that lives in a house has to support settlement. Both of those modify our ecosystems. So mining, there's a lot of people that say, well, I'm anti-mining. Okay, great. We'll take everything out of your life that was at one time a mineral. let's see how your life looks now. It absolutely does not work. So then you've got another land use, which is logging. Look around you right now. We've all got something wooden. My computer is sitting on a wooden desk, and here's the news. That wooden desk was at one point a tree. Whether it was sustainably grown or not, I don't know, but it was at one point a tree. And so the one land use which we can have that does not modify the landscape, if it's carried out responsibly, is tourism. And so tourism can be carried out responsibly, it can be carried out irresponsibly. What you measure matters. And so the impact that a giant tourist lodge has on an ecosystem, you can afford to take a massive tourist lodge and sacrifice the acre or 2 or 3 that it's using, provided there's enough income from that tourist lodge to support the ecosystem that people are coming to look at. But very often that balance is not achieved. And so as you sit at your man-made waterhole and you watch your wildlife coming down to drink, you have to ask yourself, what is the impact of this facility that is actually paying for tourism and that is actually paying for conservation? And is it actually paying for conservation? In the modern day, because there's 8 million mouths to feed in the world, and because so much of Africa lives on or below the breadline, wildlife is having a very hard time paying for itself. So we rely largely on donor funding. We rely on funding coming in from institutions and individuals that really care about our wildlife. And I would say that every single one of you that's on this call right now cares about our wildlife. Otherwise, you wouldn't be giving an hour or 2 of your precious time to listen to us talking about conservation. And why all of a sudden can conservation not pay for itself? Well, with so many people, there's more pressure on these wildlife areas. And with more pressure, you need more protection. And with more protection takes more money. And we're just not able to keep up with the simple tourism model. Then you throw something in there like COVID, which takes away the tourism model, where you've got entities like this, in some cases, multi-million-dollar corporations that have got many, many camps and lodges all over Africa are sitting with skeleton staff and absolutely nobody paying to stay at their lodges. Not because they don't want to, but simply because they can't get there. And that's where it becomes a crisis. And so there's one other way that we can finance conservation. It's a way that we have been doing for the last few years. And it's a way where we are taking our donors onto the very front line and allowing them to put their hands on some of these conservation initiatives. We're taking people on elephant collarings, on giraffe taggings, on lion collarings, on translocations. And the reason I bring this up is because everybody's looking for a new thing. I know that a lot of people on this call are in the tourism industry. A lot of people on this call are agents who send people to Africa. And understanding that your impact, your effectiveness is absolutely amplified depending on where your money goes, is absolutely crucial to making sure that whatever you're supporting is truly sustainable. So how do you know if a conservation entity is effective? So I could go through half an hour of all these different things that could be measured or whatever, but it really just comes down to one thing. Well, actually one statement that is 2 things. I'm not very good at math. Is it resulting in more wildlife and healthier ecosystems or not? So I'm going to throw up an example here. The Giraffe Conservation Foundation, a very small team out of Namibia, but one of the most effective teams that you will ever see on this planet. They almost single-handedly, with their partners, have expanded wild giraffes' home range by 5.2 million acres. They've translocated 102 giraffes in 7 translocations just in the last couple of years. They've deployed 125 GPS units to better inform them for future translocations and range expansion. Each year, they expose up to 2,500 kids to conservation in Namibia just by giving them a day in a national park. And don't forget, most African kids have never seen a wild animal. And just in 1 year, they removed over 1,000 snares, 150 of which are from live animals. And so when you look at that, has their efforts resulted in more wildlife and healthier ecosystems? Not just giraffes, but ecosystems as a whole. Of course, the answer is a resounding yes. If the entity that you support cannot answer whether there's more wildlife and a healthier ecosystem as a result of their work, the answer is probably they either don't know or there isn't, in which case you have to question whether they're effective. The Zambezi Delta in the last 5 years expanded the wild lion's home range by 2 million acres. Thousands of snares and traps have been removed, which has reduced poaching by 92%. I bring this one up because it's actually a very important part of the Zambesia ecosystems, because this is right where the Zambezi River enters the ocean. 2,500 community members benefit from conservation in that area, and 66 tons a year of sustainably harvested meat has been distributed. So there's almost zero subsistence poaching in that area. So has their conservation actions led to more wildlife and healthier ecosystems? Another resounding yes. So I'm telling you a lot of facts here. I'm telling you a lot of information. I'm telling you a lot of different ways of thinking. But there comes one major question. Why does this all matter? Why should this matter to everybody on this call and everybody that you know? And I tell you why it matters. It matters because of the next generation. If we take care of our next few steps right now, we are in the midst, as Lord Haig pointed out, of a massive, massive loss of diversity, of wild diversity. If we take the right steps now, we can slow that or even halt it. And our kids are going to get to see zebras in the wild. They're going to get to see lions and giraffes and chimpanzees. And, you know, I chose my background here very purposefully for this talk because it's an ecosystem. It's a rainforest in Congo that we have a project in. And if our kids are going to get to see those, not in zoos, not in museums, but in wild, balanced ecosystems, we as individuals need to start utilizing our resources a lot more responsibly. We need to start looking very closely at single-use plastics. We need to start looking closely at what conservation entities we're supporting. We need to look closely at where we're spending our tourism dollars and how. And we need to look very closely at, as a community, as a global community, with all, I mean, just a call like this shows what a global village we are. We've got people on this call from all over the world, and yet we're connected by a common interest, which is conservation. And we're connected by this whole idea of the Zambesia Conservation Alliance. And you look at this and you say to yourself, why does this matter? Well, it matters because of our kids. It matters because of the next generation. If we do the right thing, the next generation will get to see the wildlife that we see and love and enjoy in the same way that we see and love and enjoy it. And we owe it to them to hand them a conservation torch that is glowing so brightly that they can take it to the next level. So in closing, let me just ask you this question. What can you do? You can look at information and make good decisions before you act. Don't just take something off social media as fact. Go and look at the source. Go and look at reputable publications. Go and understand a little bit more about where your dollars are going. If you are going to donate, ask the simple question, is where this money is going to result in more wildlife and a healthier ecosystem or not? And then internally, we need to start doing more about learning from each other. Instead of non-profit entities being territorial about each other, we need to do exactly what the Zambesia Conservation Alliance is doing. They're an alliance, as are we, the Ivan Carter Wildlife Conservation Alliance. We need to learn from each other and take that model and teach each other what's truly working. So you take the Giraffe Conservation Foundation model. It's a model of taking a tiny little team and a massive partnership and identifying a species that needs help and truly changing the world for that species. That right there is modern day conservation in action. But the most important thing that we can do, aside of all of that other stuff, is instill a passion in our children for all things natural and wild. Folks, I know that I'm probably pretty close to my time. I always intend to watch the clock, but I never do. But I think Sam is telling me that I've got to start thinking about wrapping it up. So I really appreciate your time. I appreciate you being part of this. I appreciate everything that you are doing, that you intend to do, and that we hope you will do. And I hope this is the first of many, many very successful talks where we can get together and talk about what really matters and stop avoiding the elephant in the room. Thank you so much, everybody.
Ivan, thank you very much indeed. It takes an incredible skill to speak in 20 minutes and to be able to allow everybody to digest the complexities of conservation in such a clear way. I think you may be among the best in the world, in this industry, to be able to do that. So we thank you so much. We're going to take a 5-minute break now, folks, and we're a little bit ahead of schedule, which is great. During this break, we're going to show off some beautiful wild scenes accompanied by gorgeous music composed by Simon Hoare, MBE, and Commonwealth Music, incorporating the Commonwealth Youth Orchestra and Choir. This is the ZCA theme video. Thank you, and see you in about 5 minutes.